Good afternoon and welcome. This is Facebook Live. I am Mayor Stovall, and with me today we've got Larry Morgan. Larry Morgan is our Government Affairs and Policy Advisor here at the City of Gresham. Good afternoon, Larry.
Good to be here.
So, during these times, we take the opportunity to fill you in on a bunch of different things that's going on in the city. And the reason we do this live is to give you, our community members, an opportunity to ask us questions as we give you updates. And many times we get questions ahead of time. So we've got some questions here ahead of time. We're gonna work through those here in just a few moments. And any questions that you may have for us, we'll also talk through. So Larry, actually, you do our government affairs and some of our policy stuff. That's at the regional level, at the state level, at the federal level. Now, I don't think many of our community members actually fully appreciate all the work that we do when we're talking about government affairs, government relations, and the concept of policy. So can you just fill us in on what that looks like? What are some of the things that you work on kind of on a day in and day out basis? And as a city, how does that benefit us?
Yeah, so currently the Oregon legislature is in the middle of their session. And every other year we have about a 6-month period that the Constitution requires the legislature to deliberate about the people's business. Right now, we've been monitoring projects the city's been working on for the last several years and priority bills that are important to the values of our city, our council, and our community at large. At a federal level, we have a new leadership in the House and new leadership in the Senate, divided government. And so we're actively monitoring the projects, priorities that we have for transportation, for community safety, and others as a whole. So we monitor everyday work that's happening at the national level, local level. We stop legislation that's bad for our community. We help legislation that's good for our community. And we work under the consent of council to do so.
So some of this legislation, I mean, when we think about kind of at the city level, many times we have ordinances and things like that we deal with on the city level. We have the city code that dictates many times how we build things, and in some instances, the things that should happen in our community, that shouldn't happen in our community, those types of things. When we think about the state legislature, what are some of the things that impact us that may get discussed at the legislative level?
So yeah, anything from housing. There's a conversation about zoning, proper land use, making sure that it's consistent with our home rule policy that allow Gresham City Council to dictate where land is built and homes are built, etc. Or it could be something as substantial this year as the use of red light cameras. The legislature was talking about whether that should be allowed for the city's discretion or not. At a federal level, there's conversation about funding and priorities. But quite frankly, it's a lot all happening at once. We have to kind of balance our time. We have to communicate with council and the mayor, at a very rapid pace to make sure we can be timely and we can get our message out there to the community at large and our representatives.
So with that, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the things that we're working on. And let's first let's revisit some of the stuff we've done in the past.
Right.
So I believe one of the big efforts that we had a few years back that we've benefited from now was our ask to the state legislature for our youth services program,
right,
which includes our youth violence prevention also. Now, that's primarily funded through state funding, is that correct?
Correct.
And we were able to utilize that state funding to stand up this entire program of youth services that's now about engagement and opportunity at many levels for our youth, which also leads into youth violence prevention, which is a critical component to our overall public safety. Talk to us a little bit about kind of how we go through a process of being able to get something like that to come our direction and why it's beneficial to ask the state legislature to give us that funding or provide that funding.
Yeah, as many know in our community, we've funded law enforcement and community engagement in many different iterations over the years. The new leadership in the council and under our city leadership has directed us to look more nimbly and creatively, standing up our youth violence team as of last March. The legislature has asked the city of Gresham and other communities to find ways to invest in new ways. That's not only getting at the root causes, but it's not just funding the problem long term. So we've stood up culturally specific, culturally catered partnerships in these communities, in some of these underserved populations as well, to make sure that there's opportunity, there's engagement, there's collaboration not only with law enforcement, but with community leaders and the like. So much so that the governor and her team was just in the city of Gresham, as you know, hearing about our program, hearing about the work that we're doing, to make sure that the state as a whole is investing in these critical pockets in our community, as well as critical neighborhoods across our state that have not had opportunity historically and have been overlooked historically.
And the governor's been very supportive of this program.
Correct.
Just really a champion for it, and it's been, you know, it's had positive impacts. They work very closely with many departments, including, of course, our police department, as we do these great efforts to decrease violence among our youth, which really adds to the challenges that we face from a public safety perspective. Along those same lines, we've got some requests in front of the legislature this year.
Correct.
At the state level. And one of those is continued funding for our youth services program. What else are we asking for from our state legislature?
Yeah, one big component that we've gone to Salem and asked for is investment along 181st. Again, we've seen historically neighborhoods and zip codes in our community that have been either underfunded or not funded. And these have been communities of color, traditionally speaking. So we've asked the legislature to look at investments, critical investments in sidewalk, in lighting, in cameras and other technology enhancements in these areas, to make sure that we have a full city that has full investment across the board. And it's been great to hear from Senator Gorsuch and our Representative Ruiz and Hudson, and how invested they've been in hearing what Gresham needs and taking those priorities to Salem. Another key component that we've done as well is the CHIPS Act and the investment there that I know that you went on the front lines for, advocating for investment, long-term investment with microchip and other industry, to make sure we have career jobs in Gresham, investments there as well, and the utilization of critical space to make people be able to work, live, and raise a family in Gresham.
Excellent. So, I mean, we've got a lot of great work going on at the state legislative level.
Correct.
As we move to the federal level, we've got some requests there too. And historically, we've actually done some great work there. We've got about $3.5 million coming to 181st.
Correct.
And that was Representative Blumenauer, Congressman Blumenauer did great work to help us get those dollars to look at safety improvements, similar to what you were just saying about a legislative ask that we have here at the state level. But also, we've got a combination of federal and state dollars coming to our Graydon Sports Park.
Correct.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing we talked about youth violence prevention, is providing the same opportunities for communities of color, for all communities in our community. Starts with Graydon. Access to nature, access to recreation, access to, you know, peer-to-peer engagement, which is so oftentimes missing when you're trying to grow up. And you know, I grew up in this neck of the woods, and it's difficult if you want to be able to have recreation and access to nature. And so the investment that Graydon will be is bringing some of those federal tax dollars, some of those state tax dollars back to Gresham for a world-class marquee destination sports park that's not only good for economic development, it's good for recreation, it's good for educational outcomes, and it, again, gives opportunities for every kid that grows up in Gresham like everywhere else in the state. And
when we talk about economic development, sometimes folks don't make the direct connection, or at least even the peripheral connection between Graydon Sports Park and developments like that and economic development. But the city of Hillsborough, they've got a sports park there that's fairly well built out, and they've got a minor league baseball team. And recently it was announced that they're looking at a professional football team coming to that same sports park. I mean, so that is economic development, which brings, you know, tourism to the community and traded sector, because sometimes tourism isn't seen as traded sector, meaning we have something within our community that brings outside dollars to our community. Is there anything that we've worked on recently that really, you know, is something that you're super proud of, that we've worked at from a legislative perspective?
I think I'll go to the federal level and talk about that. I think one of the great things that it's been good to see is the partnerships we developed along the way. We applied for what they call congressionally directed spending. It's been a formula the last couple of years where we put together applications in various industries and sectors and advocate for federal dollars to be placed in these programs. Most notably, we applied for one in the last couple of months that's going to enhance our wastewater treatment facility, which is already a marquee prime example of not only economic responsibility but also of innovation and efficiency. We worked with some of our folks that are looking to expand in the semiconductor space that are going to be using that for more, of their output of waste. And we've also worked with the industries in the environment to make sure that it's not only economically responsible, but it's resilient. And so that's an example of, I think, bringing those federal dollars that Gresham residents are already paying back home, making it a marquee project that's only good for the environment. It's going to be good for industry to create, career and life jobs. And it'll be good for the overall investment that we see in our community. And I think that's a win-win not only for the environment, but for commerce and for our community at large.
Well, and that just continues to hearten the heart in the sense of bringing a sense of joy in the fact that we're doing things that are positively impacting our community as we do this incredible work. And so I think having an opportunity to share with the folks that live here in our community all the great work that's going on at the regional, federal, state levels is I think paramount, so that we can let them know that it's more than just what we do here in the city. It really is an expansion to ensure that we can bring those outside investments to the city of Gresham to have a positive impact. One of the things that, as we just referenced, one of the things that I'm, as a mayor, I'm incredibly proud of is our youth services. I mean, the engagement that we have had now across the entire community of our youth and the reciprocal benefits that we're seeing is impressive. Partnering with our law enforcement to ensure we make those connections in our youth, really start to see our law enforcement as a resource, rather than something that's a negative experience, is something I think that's powerful. And we've seen the benefits of that now. And so really looking at these outside investments is something that's critical for our city, because as we know, we as a city, we've got some challenges in our financial areas. And for many years, we've seen the real purchasing power of our dollar decrease pretty significantly. And most folks don't quite understand the situation that we're in, and I'll talk about our financial situation in a little bit. We've had a couple measures that have limited our ability to raise revenue. And so since 1998, revenue in the city is basically capped at about 3% annual increase. And costs go up generally more than that. Over the last 3 or 4 years, as we all know, inflation has been somewhere in the 6 to 7%. So many times double or more than double what that 3% increase has been. And so that is part of the challenge that we see. You've got a situation where your revenue is capped in its growth, but your costs across the board go up. In the private sector, they generally just raise prices. Right. In the public sector, we don't have the ability to do that. And so what we've seen is a real decrease in the purchasing power of our dollar, as we've seen inflation go up and the value of our purchasing power come down. And that's really why we're in the situation we're in today. And so and as you know, and as many of our community members know, we're now looking at the safety levy. And that safety levy is going to be critical for the city as we look to move forward. And sometimes we get questions about, okay, why do we need the safety levy? Part of why we need the safety levy is just what we just walked through, is this idea that our purchasing power has decreased because our revenue can only rise by roughly 3% annually, but our costs go up. And that's an equation that doesn't quite fit over time. The gap gets bigger and bigger, and that's absolutely what we've seen. So that's one of the challenges. So the work that you help us out on is in your role at the regional, state, and federal levels, really help us fill some of those gaps. And part of which is, our youth services program. I know I keep referencing that, but that youth services is funded primarily by the state legislature, by the state government and their budget. Without that, we wouldn't be able to have such an incredible resource that we have there. But on the local level, we've got police and fire, and we also have our homeless services, and we've got to make sure that we provide the resources for those agencies. Folks are asking about the police, fire, and parks fee. So the police, fire, and parks fee, right now it's $15 a month. And that $15 a month is split in two different, it's split 50-50. $750 of that is what we call the permanent rate. And we use the term per door. So it's not based on a property, it's based on, per door. What that means is you could have a multifamily situation, which is generally an apartment building, and each time there's a utility that serves each of those units, that would get that 750 or the 15 once we have that temporary amount thrown on. So you've got two components, the temporary at 750 and the permanent at 750. And folks are asking, what will happen to that if the levy passes? And the council has absolutely been discussing what that looks like and discussing different scenarios. That is going to come back to the council in June as we begin to wrestle with what that looks like. We're looking at the levy, the votes, next week, and then we may have a week or so as it's all kind of playing itself out. As we know, it takes a little bit of time after the actual vote date to get all the information in. But ultimately, the council will be working on that police, fire, and parks fee and what happens to that and what that looks like. So to our folks that are watching, please stay tuned because we absolutely want to see how this process goes over the next couple of weeks, and then the council will certainly look to move forward with what that levy looks like and what the fee looks like. Anything you've been hearing out there in the community in regards to the public safety levy? Any questions that we can answer from a perspective of what you've been hearing?
I think one thread or tone that I've heard a lot is, what will this allow us to do? Mm-hmm. Once we get those dollars, we talk about youth services, we talk about mental health, we talk about all these things. What will this allow us to do differently that we're not doing, or expand beyond what we're currently already doing? I think that will be one thread or tone.
That's a great question. I think part of it is right now nationally, when you look at the police per thousand nationally is about 2.2. So if you have 1,000 people, you have 2.2 police officers per thousand. Here in Gresham, we have about 1 police officer per thousand.
Wow.
Yeah, 1. So we're less than half of the national average. And so when folks ask, what will we be able to do? We will be able to do more of the positive things that actually makes our community more livable. Part of those things is making sure that we can get back to some of the community building that we used to do when we were a smaller community and we had a higher ratio. So that community building is going to be something I think is critical because it's not only about enforcement. Our Safe Gresham is collaboration, prevention, and intervention. And so that prevention and intervention is a key piece of this. And many times folks don't see our law enforcement as the prevention side of things, but they absolutely are. Building relationships, working with our youth, maybe going to Friday night basketball and building those relationships is critical. On the fire side, we're up above where we should be from a national response time. And that's critical. Seconds count when somebody's suffering from a heart attack or someone's suffering from a stroke. Seconds count. And we, as we think about what this does for us, it really gives us an opportunity to start responding quicker to situations. And so we're looking at bringing on a mobile unit, an integrated health mobile unit. And this integrated health mobile unit will be a smaller vehicle than the big rigs that people see out on the street. So it won't be a fire engine, it won't be a fire truck. It'll be a mobile integrated health unit that actually delivers some services right on site. So sometimes, they have to end up taking a person to an emergency room when if we had some of those resources right there, we may not have to. And so we get to respond on site in ways that we haven't been able to do historically. We're going to have expanded fire services. Again, getting to a fire sooner is going to be much better than getting there later. Right. And one of the things, I had a chance to get a little more educated as to what's going on with fire these days. And fires burn many times much faster and hotter than they did historically. And old folks like me, in comparison to you, Mr. Morgan, we remember when things were built out of solid wood. Sometimes we old guys like me say things just aren't made like they used to be. And that's true when you look at some of the things we find in homes these days. Right. So in homes these days, you've got things that are synthetic, and that synthetic burns faster and hotter than some of the older materials.
Interesting.
And so what used to take, maybe 10 to 15 minutes for a fire to go from its initial start to a blaze can now happen in 6 to 7 minutes. So those are things that we have to take into consideration as we look to keep our community safe. And then prevention. Prevention also works on the fire side of things. The more we're able to go out and engage folks and educate on the ways that we can reduce fire hazards, the better off we are in the short, medium, and long term. So those are all the many things that we're looking at doing with expanded services when we have an opportunity to bring on the right size team. You know, lastly, sometimes folks will say, well, Mayor, can't the city just make do with the resources that you currently have? You know, and anybody who bumps into me, they always know that I'm always going to bring, when you talk about resources, they always know that I'm going to reference a couple of our sister cities. And, you know, Gresham, you know, our general fund is about $90 million. And there's various numbers that are utilized between 85 and 90 because of what we call transfers. We're not going to go deep into that. But let's say it's roughly $90 million. Our sister city, which is Hillsborough. Hillsborough is about 108,000 population. We're roughly 115,000. Our general fund is 90 million. Hillsborough's general fund is about 125 million. So that's $35 million more than what we have. That's a third more than what we have as resources. Beaverton's about 97,000 population. So almost 20,000 less than us, and their general fund budget equivalent is also roughly about $125 million. $35 million more than us. When you look at a city that has a similar general fund as us, as the city of Gresham, you have to go down to Medford, which is about 87,000 people. Wow. Their general fund is about the same size as ours. So we're working with a substantially lower general fund or budget per se than our sister cities by a long shot. We have one of the lowest tax rates in the entire state from a perspective of our permanent rate. So that's why we're in the challenge that we are. And so as folks ask me those questions, I say, yeah, we've not been making the right investments in our city, and it's about time we step up as community members and we make these investments. And you know, I always tell people, I live in the city also, so this impacts me just as much as it impacts each of them. And so I appreciate the questions and the conversations, but I also want to make sure that folks know that we're here, we're experiencing, you know, what we're looking at moving forward with here, and these are much needed resources as we make these critical investments. Gresham is an amazing city. We want to make sure that we make the investments so that it becomes more livable and we retain the sense of community that we have developed. So with that, I do want to answer at least a couple of questions that we have, and I don't know if we've gotten any live questions, but we've got a couple questions from Facebook to start the conversation off. And the question was, we're doing some sidewalk construction over on Burnside, and the question was, could we do that construction at night so that we can decrease the disruption of traffic? What are your thoughts about that, Mr. Larry Morgan?
Well, I can say as a retired city councilor, you know, we have to balance traffic congestion with the ability for our workers that are limited to do the work that's needed as well. So there's a balance there.
Yes, and you did just mention you were a former city councilor.
Retired.
And what city was that?
City of Troutdale.
City of Troutdale. So not only is Larry our government affairs and policy advisor here at the City of Gresham, he is a former city councilor down in the amazing city of Troutdale. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, part of the challenge that we face is the balance between everything that you're just referencing, part of which is cost. As soon as you move outside of those daytime hours, the costs go up pretty substantially. And also the safety decreases. So safety decreases when they're doing this work at night. You know, it's clear that as soon as you move to a nighttime type of construction, you also get into situations where folks can't see as well. And so we tend to see more injuries and things like that at night when they're doing this work. And we're working with heavy machinery, all those types of things. Folks get tired, and that can sometimes be something that just doesn't bode well for the safety of the workers or the safety of the folks who are transiting across our community. So great question. We appreciate the question, Vaughn. And we certainly look at things where we do have the flexibility of doing them in off hours, weekends, things like that, to try and mitigate that traffic impact. So we certainly try to do that as much as possible. You also asked about potholes and said that there was a large pothole somewhere in the city. I'm not quite sure where it is, but wouldn't we be better off actually filling potholes than replacing sidewalks? We want to do both. We want to do both. As a matter of fact, Vaughn actually went and asked our Department of Environmental Services head, Steve Fancher, about what potholes across the city have we not been able to get to. And I also went to our My Gresham app, which My Gresham at GreshamOregon.gov. That's where you go to report anything you see in the city that we need to address. And over the last week and beyond, I could not find a single pothole that was reported that had not been filled. So, Vaughn, if you have a pothole that you've seen, you have the ability to take a photo on your camera with your phone and then get on My Gresham app, upload that. We will get out there as quick as we possibly can to get that filled. Furthermore, we did go through a pretty rough winter this year. As you recall, back in, was it March or early April, that we had that 15 or 18 inches of snow that hit. At any time we have that freeze and the thaw, it actually has that upheaval, from the earth beneath, and it pushes the asphalt around and creates the potholes. And so we absolutely want to make sure that we're getting out there. And if you see a pothole, Vaughn, we absolutely ask you to just take a photo of that, get on My Gresham app, put the information in there, let us know where it is. Sometimes we'll get a photo and they'll say, hey, there's a pothole here. We got the photo, but we actually don't know where it is. So make sure you give us the information of where that is, and we will get out there as quickly as we possibly can to get that pothole filled. So I've got our promise from our road team, and they said, hey, we'll get out there as quickly as we can. So thank you for the questions, Vaughn. Greatly appreciated. All right. With that, it doesn't look like we have any questions, Larry. I think you've answered everything for the viewers this afternoon. So I just want to thank you for your time and attention, and thank you for everything that you do to move the city forward in regards to our regional, our state, and our federal legislative asks, because that is a critical part of how we as a city move forward. We get those investments, we implement them, and many times there are reporting requirements that go along with it. So we need to make sure that we generally don't use return on investment in the public space, but there's a form of return on investment that we have to report back out to each of those levels when we look at receiving those dollars.
Right.
So it's really a benefit to the city of Gresham to have you working on these critical items for us, and the rest of our team here at the city of Gresham working on these important items. So with that, I just want to thank you all who dropped by, and thank you all that did not drop by, but you'll be catching this later as you peruse the world of Facebook. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. And until we see you again, please stay safe and stay healthy.